How indignant can progressives make themselves? There's a real competition going on, and it's sweeping the nation. Progressive versus progressive, competing to see who can most flamboyantly claim to be offended, to proclaim that their feelings have been hurt, or that their sensitivities have been rubbed raw, or their serenity disturbed, or their composure discombobulated by something that someone has said, or by something they have seen, such as a Confederate flag, or a building named after Woodrow Wilson. But, actually, I think progressives are not sufficiently imaginative. There are many more things they could be indignant about, starting with where I live, Washington, D.C. The Washington Post newspaper is, if it will pardon the expression, on the warpath against the name of the Washington Redskins football team. The paper says the name is racist, insulting, demeaning, insensitive, and so on. But the Washington Post takes its name from its city, which is named for George Washington, who was not only a slave owner, he was a tobacco farmer, which some progressives probably think is almost as awful.
No way!
Surely the Post should change its name and should demand that the nation's capital be renamed, perhaps as Eleanor Roosevelt City. Obviously, it cannot be named for her husband, he who ordered the internment of 117,000 persons of Japanese descent, 2/3 of whom were native-born American citizens. And there are hundreds of other towns, counties, parks, and schools named for Washington, such as Washington and Lee University. Good grief, the name is double hate speech. Robert E. Lee actually commanded the Confederate Army. Washington is not the only name progressives should scrutinize. The word Oklahoma is a compound of two words from the Choctaw language, words meaning red and people. If it is intolerable to have a football team named Redskins, it must be worse to have a state named Red People. But let's get back to cleansing America of all mentions of historic figures who were less than perfect progressives. On the tidal basin in Washington, there's a memorial to the slave-owning Thomas Jefferson. This memorial should have a trigger warning carved into its marble. Jacksonville, Florida, and Jackson, Mississippi, and many other places and things are named for Andrew Jackson, the tormentor of Native Americans. All must be renamed for someone who was saintly as progressives understand saintliness. And speaking of saints, surely good progressives are traumatized by the names of St. Louis, St. Petersburg, San Diego, San Antonio, not to mention Corpus Christi. Progressives like it when courts rule that non-denominational prayers at high school graduations violate the separation of church and state. Why then don't they consider it a constitutional outrage that there are cities named for religious figures, including Nancy Pelosi's San Francisco? That city is, if progressives will pardon the expression, the Vatican of American progressivism. Progressives should demand that all such cities be renamed for progressive saints. Tony Bennett could sing, "I left my heart in Nancy Pelosi City." Or we could give these places names that give no offense because they have no meaning. Joseph Nippenberg is an American rarity, a sensible professor. His droll suggestion is that we spare progressives from discomfort by giving cities and buildings the kind of meaningless names that are given to car models, names such as Acura and Elantra and Sentra. And what about the state flag of hyper-progressive Massachusetts? Its flag depicts a Native American holding, brace yourself, a bow and arrow, a weapon. Surely progressivism's sensitivity police cannot permit this depiction. It reinforces the hurtful stereotype of Native Americans as less than perfectly peaceful people. Minnesota, too, should hang its head in shame. Its state seal depicts a pioneer tilling a field and a Native American riding away and carrying a spear. Any progressive can see that this seal conveys multiple racial slurs. The spear, another weapon, another stereotype of Native Americans as violent. The Native American riding away is stigmatized as nomadic, hence unproductive, whereas the farmer who is white is industrious. So, The seal communicates subliminal slander, the coded message of white superiority. Who knew that Minnesotans who have voted Democratic in 10 consecutive elections since 1972 embrace white supremacy? I could go on, but you get the picture. Still, you should feel sorry for the progressive sensitivity enforcers. Those who constantly find reason to take offense are rarely happy people. The problem, however, is that such people make almost everyone else miserable too. I'm George Will for Prager University.
Try this at your next party. Ask your guests to define the term social justice. Okay, it's not charades or Twister, but it should generate some interesting conversation, especially if your guests are on the political left. Since everyone on that side of the spectrum talks incessantly about social justice, they should be able to provide a good definition, right? But ask 10 liberals to tell you what they mean by social justice, and you'll get 10 different answers. That's because social justice means anything its champions want it to mean. Almost without exception, labor unions, universities and colleges, private foundations, and public charities claim at least part of their mission to be the spreading of social justice far and wide. Here's the mission statement of the AFL-CIO, but it could be the mission statement for 1,000 such organizations. Quote, "The mission of the AFL-CIO is to improve the lives of working families, to bring economic justice to the workplace and social justice to our nation." In short, social justice is code for good things no one needs to argue for and no one dare be against. This very much troubled the great economist Friedrich Hayek. This is what he wrote in 1976, 2 years after winning the Nobel Prize in economics. "I have come to feel strongly that the greatest service I can still render to my fellow men would be that I could make the speakers and writers among them thoroughly ashamed ever again to employ the term social justice." Why was Hayek so upset by what seems like such a positive and certainly unobjectionable term? Because Hayek, as he so often did, saw right to the core of the issue. And what he saw frightened him. Hayek understood that beneath the political opportunism and intellectual laziness of the term social justice was a pernicious philosophical claim, namely that freedom must be sacrificed in order to redistribute income. Ultimately, social justice is about the state amassing ever-increasing power in order to do good things. What are good things? Well, whatever the champions of social justice decide this week. But first, last, and always, it is the cause of economic redistribution. According to the doctrine of social justice, the haves always have too much, and the have-nots never have enough. You don't have to take my word for it. That is precisely how a UN report on social justice defines the term. Quote, "Social justice may be broadly understood as the fair and compassionate distribution of the fruits of economic growth. Social justice is not possible without strong and coherent redistributive policies conceived and implemented by public agencies." Let me repeat that. Strong and coherent redistributive policies conceived and implemented by public agencies. And it gets worse. The UN report goes on to insist that, quote, "Present-day believers in an absolute truth identified with virtue and justice are neither willing nor desirable companions for the defenders of social justice." Translation? If you believe truth and justice are concepts independent of the agenda of the forces of progress as defined by the left, you are an enemy of social justice. Compassion, or social justice, is when government takes your money and gives it to someone else. Greed is when you want to keep it. The underlying point of social justice, then, amounts to a sweeping indictment of a free society. It suggests that any perceived unfairness or sorrow or economic want must be addressed by yet another government effort to remedy that unfairness, that sorrow, or that economic want. All we need to do is invoke the abracadabra phrase, social justice, and we're on our way. The invocation of social justice always works from the assumption that the right people, the anointed few, can simply impose fairness, prosperity, and any other good thing you can think of. And the only institution capable of imposing social justice is the state. And keep in mind, the conventional wisdom among liberal elites is that conservatives are the ones who want to impose their values on everyone else. The self-declared champions of social justice believe the state must remedy and can remedy all perceived wrongs. Anyone who disagrees is an enemy of what is good and right. And the state must therefore coerce them to do what is socially just. And that, as Hayek prophesied, is no longer a free society. Is that the kind of society you want to live in? If it isn't, beware of what will be done in the name of social justice. I'm Jonah Goldberg of the American Enterprise Institute and National Review for Prager University.
My name's Eddie Brock.
And how did you get the...
So, as we were talking earlier, I decided to be for Milo, for freedom of speech, for freedom of expression, to let Milo talk at this place. And these anti-fascist fascists decided that that was too much, threw rocks at me, broke my phone, and decided to steal from me and break my face. Nothing but cowards. And this is what they want to represent. This is not America. America is freedom. America is liberty.
So I decided to come to see if I could get in, see what he had to say, and see the marketplace of free speech ideas come about. And
protest someone's right to come here and speak, but it's another thing to create this much amount of destruction and violence and hurt and harm to other people.
Shut down by a bunch of people in black bloc, protester masks.
And to attend an event that was completely covered and protected by the First Amendment.